Okay, this is going to be a really fun one, I think. I have a unique kind of a sap, unique kind of a slungshot, and as you could tell by the video preview or whatever, the load in this case, the thing that makes this weapon work, is a billiard ball. So in terms of the kinds of weapons I tend to specialize in as a researcher, this is a monster, right? Like, for a pocket weapon, this is huge, because yeah, it's, a billiard ball has a certain standard size. And that size is much bigger than your standard slungshot, sap, or blackjack load. It's made by Pam Soldoff. I've only ever heard good things about her work and finally got my hands on an example. That's paracord, as you probably can tell. That's the modern day slungshot material. Up close look. The paracord's coated in, I forget what she said, but some kind of wax-like material, synthetic wax-like material, so it's got a cool feel, cool slick feel. And yeah, it's a loop and a load. So big that it's more of a novelty, right? They're really cool, but you wouldn't carry this around all the time, I don't think. One way I found to actually carry it is when I'm on a bike ride. Just hangs there, looks innocuous enough, great. Interesting echo of, the get back whip, which bikers would, hang from their motorcycle handlebars. Like so. Here's an up close of that one. So yeah, it kind of trails in the wind as you're riding, looks cool, and emergency slungshot, ready for action. But back to our subject. Here are some more samples of Pam's work. So yeah, definitely a fun item, a little bit off the beaten path. A pretty improbable evolution of the slungshot. And if we're going to talk slungshots, let's go to the literary source, which would be my book. Hey, it's true. So anyway, let's do a real quick recap of slungshot history. These started as sailor implements. No, not the one pictured there. That's a different kind of related sailor implement. But this is my chapter about seafaring weapons. And this is how it started. So you see our sailor here, U.S. Navy, casting the line out to that ship, and he does that by having a weight encased in a knot, and sailors were very good at rope work and knot work, so that's how that was invented. The first and third items on the top row here. So this kind of weapon that you're looking at evolved from that kind of tool. You basically have a flail. You cut it to an appropriate length, give it a loop, and you can carry it around in your pocket. And people did a lot in the 19th century, including in an incident that Abraham Lincoln, pictured here, argued about in court. This was the famous Almanac trial. That seafaring to landlubbing transmission didn't just take place throughout, like, the frontier either, where Lincoln was back then. Here, later on in the Gangs of New York type era, if you will, people like this and this, these toughs absolutely carried slingshots a lot. As a reminder, really any weight on the end of a short but very flexible connection is a slungshot. So I made a video on this product from Bad Love Leather, this monster 16-ounce coffin sap. I call it the coffin sap, but it's technically a slungshot. So this kind of thing has made it into modernity, most especially with these, the monkey fist keychains that you see everywhere. So they are still around. They are still a thing. And so are slungshots in general. The famous lock in a sock or something in a sock. For instance, here's actual footage from a prison, well, it's a still shot, of an inmate with his improvised sock slungshot getting ready for the guards to come in. Things are about to get real there, but don't bother looking up the video. It's pretty uneventful. They just tackle him. And then this classic street weapon, also a slungshot, again, talking about the modern era, the bandana and a lock. So that's kind of some of the background, really catching all the way up to present times, but let's look at this guy in particular now. Let's give it a light test drive. The thing with that grip that I just used, this one here, I feel like I get a lot of control because I'm pinching right at the end of the cord between my thumb and my forefinger, but you obviously don't have a lot of reach, so there's that. How else might we use this? Well, here's one way. My favorite grip with this kind of thing, just loop the pinky through. I've got a lot more reach now, which means more reach and more power. So I like that. This looks and feels more like traditional slungshot fighting length. But I may have to deal with more bounce back, right? The thing about the fully flexible connection is that load can come back at you. So theoretically, it could come back and hit me like this. And that's not a small thing to get hit with. on your forearm, so that might be a concern. We'll find out because I'm going to do a lot of swing testing here. And speaking of that, why don't we go ahead and give it a shot? So I'll go back to my initial thought on how to hold this, and let's hit something a little bit harder this time. Got a couple of books stacked up, and in slow motion, let's watch for the bounce back from this grip. None at all. Now let's try the longer reach. Ooh. Okay, we've got a concern there. I've talked in other videos about how to strike with this kind of implement to negate bounce back, but this is just swinging through. Let's try this grip now. Very simple, intuitive, just hang on and hit. Let's see. Okay, that's not my favorite choice as a grip if I was just going to grab it and use it, but it definitely performed best. But how hard does this thing hit anyway, right? Is it effective? Well, I only know of one true way to find out. Yes, I'm going to hit myself. I remember Skolagrim, in case you don't know who that is, one of the big weapons YouTubers. Must be nice to have 1.5 million viewers. Anyway, he's great, but him talking about how he's a professional idiot, and he was just hitting other objects with his weapon in that video. So what does that make me if I'm going to hit myself? Who knows? But it's all about intellectual curiosity, really. So here I am, very poor setting and cinematography, regardless. And I can now report this son of a bitch hurts a lot. And that makes sense, right? We've covered this in previous videos. The looser the connection, the more power you're going to get. Hadn't even shown you the cooler side of this, of the actual billiard ball. See that? Forgetting the red marks I left on my stomach, let's move on to how much damage billiard balls can do, because this weapon kind of accidentally pulls in an old history. Everybody remember this? Horrible quality, I know, but yeah, Out for Justice, 1991. I admit there was a time in my life I thought Steven Seagal was really cool. I was a kid. And anyway, yeah, the billiard ball sap actually has a moment in movies. But doing this video got me to thinking about billiard balls as weapons, period, because fights happen in pool halls a lot. I just Googled pool hall fight and instantly got many, many results. It also made you remember this book, Mark the Animal McYoung's Cheap Shots, Ambushes, and Other Lessons, a down and dirty book on street fighting and survival. Wow, all the way from 1989. Maybe I got my love of using really long book titles from him. And there was a really fun vignette in that book, man, I read that a long time ago, about a guy he knew who would always stay near the pool table so that when a brawl broke out, he could throw pool balls into the chests of anyone who came at him. And as McYoung says, in terms of getting a pool ball thrown into your chest, not something easily ignored, in case you're wondering. How about that? Pool ball as a ranged weapon, but it could also be a melee weapon even without the slungshot. For instance, here's an incident from the Southwestern Reporter, 1921, Supreme and Appellate Courts of Arkansas, Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, and Texas. Bottom line is that at one point, quote, Hurt struck him in the face with a pool or billiard ball, comma, cutting his face and causing the blood to run, period. The results of this dust-up were deadly as a gun was eventually brought into play, but more importantly for our purposes, it proves what I would have guessed. Since fights happen a lot in pool halls, it did not take people long to realize you could grab a billiard ball and use it as a fist load. You probably wouldn't punch with it so much as actually strike with it, kind of like, palm down. Anyway, thrown and not thrown, a fighting history of the billiard ball, kind of what is accidentally tapped into by this guy here. It's time for more hitting, as you can tell. Heard that ow? Yeah, that was no joke. I popped myself on my thumb, and that hurts. So in these swings, I'm going with more power than I was previously in the video, maybe a little more close to actual, like fighting strength, so that was interesting. What I learned is that something to really consider is alignment. If I hold it like this is like swinging a knife or a sword, which is a great idea with a knife or a sword. The problem here is, if this comes back along the exact same axis, it's going to hit bone. You'll notice I'm using the longer grip here, so in particular we're talking about it coming back and hitting my wrist bone, and you do not want that. If I use the shorter grip here, that's how I managed to hit my thumb, because it's got much less reach, but it's still going to wrap back around and find something. And that all led me to conclude that what the initial experiments showed, that this is probably the best grip. Notice here, if you get a kind of a perfect swing back, you're going to hit muscle and not bone, right? And that holds true regardless of which side. If it happened to somehow, say you're doing a back fist motion here, well, it'd bounce back and hit the inside of your forearm, but on the flat. And some people might say, well, a weapon that can come back and hit you at all is not worth using, blah, blah, blah. But like I said with the nunchaku, it's a matter of degree. I mean, you can't be a wimp about it. If you might get some incidental touching, that's okay. So here it goes, playing a little bit 0 to 100, which you get with a fully flexible weapon that has a short connection, so it really does kind of behave like a nunchaku in that way. And let's test the grip that I ended up settling on. Hitting hard here and not really having a problem. Amazing how a slight modification in technique can make a huge difference. And speaking of bounce back, modern monkey fist keychains like this, modern slungshots, always have a hard load. Usually a steel ball bearing. Well, interestingly enough, I know I've mentioned this in the past, but might be the first time you're seeing one of these videos. In the old days, that doesn't seem to have been the norm. Usually it was some kind of composite load. Several bullets, metal shot, that kind of a thing. Here's a wonderfully old school looking slungshot by Simon Davidson of Davidson Leather. He does great work. So in the old days, when you saw something like this, I think there was probably at least a 50-50 chance that it was not filled with one solid object, one solid load. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I'm going to quote an old source cited in my book. Sailormen who take to robbery use occasionally the slungshot, which was their device in the old days when almost all merchant ships carried guns, and little cannonballs could be readily picked up and put in slings. Somewhat similar to what we're looking at here, right? This cannonball of sorts being tied up and used. So, really cool object. It touches on a couple of different aspects of weapons history, a lot of it overlooked, as you can imagine, kind of my specialty, including the billiard ball as an impact weapon. Thanks for watching, as always.